Hello and welcome to the Book Thing. My name is Mark and today I'm giving you a wrap up of everything that I read in October. So October was a pretty busy reading month, to be honest. I was involved in one readathon and two book clubs, and then I read some other stuff on top of that as well. So in all, I got through about 18 things. Now, a few of those were short stories, but most of them were full-size books. So it was a pretty busy reading month. For a start, this was the month of the Spooky Scary Skeleton Halloween Readathon arranged by Nicole over at Nicole's Bookish Nooks, and she was kind enough to let me be a co-host of this. So I got through all 8 prompts for the readathon. Now, the first 3 of these I've already done a wrap-up video for. They were The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury, which was to fulfill the prompt about a book about Halloween. I read Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Fanu, which was to fulfill the prompt about a classic horror, and I read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, which is to fulfill the prompt about a story that has a ghost in it. So I'll leave the link to the video where I've done those, so I'm not going to go into those 3 again. Hello, it's Future Mark, once again sorting out the amateurish nonsense from past Mark. When past Mark shot this, he didn't realise how far in the camera was zoomed, so every time he held up a book, you couldn't see what the book was. So I'm going to interject every so often to actually show you the books he's talking about, because he's referring to things that you can't see. The things I have to deal with. So to fulfill the prompt of a thriller from an author I hadn't heard of before, I read Retribution by Jilliane Hoffman. This story opens on the character of CJ, who is brutally sexually assaulted, and then many years later finds herself the prosecutor of this serial killer case, and it transpires that the person she is prosecuting for these brutal murders is in fact the man who assaulted her many years previously. And it's all about her legal and ethical dilemmas about prosecuting the man for these murders when she is potentially involved, and also about wanting her to get the justice that she deserves, considering the statute of limitations has run out on the assault that she suffered. A bit of a word of warning about the beginning of this book, because the actual assault, while it doesn't go into in graphic detail, it is fairly terrifying and brutal. It's quite a harsh one to get through. But after that, what it settles into is a pretty decent psychological thriller. It's clear Jilliane Hoffman knows her stuff about legalities, because the way it's the actual court procedures and things like that are played feel very, very true to life. It was a decent thriller. I gave it 3.5 stars. For the prompt of a book with a black cover, I went with The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. The Screwtape Letters is told in the form of letters. It is the correspondence from a senior demon called Screwtape to his junior nephew called Wormwood, and Wormwood's role is to tempt a man into, sin and ending up in hell and all the sort of stuff that demons tempt people for. Going into this, I thought that this was going to be a bit of a story about the demons trying to tempt the man with elements of C.S. Lewis's own spirituality and theology being brought into it, because C.S. Lewis was a convert to Christianity and became quite a devout Christian, so a lot of those undertones are seen very much in his later things in the Chronicles of Narnia, which I wasn't a massive fan of, if I'm completely honest. I thought the Screwtape Letters was going to be the story of these demons trying to tempt the man with elements of his personal philosophy and theology being brought in. What it really was his personal theology and philosophy slightly wrapped around a little bit by the story with the demons. It was much more a whimsical theology book than it was a novel as such. It wasn't for me. I found it quite boring. I think if someone wants to explore some of their Christian faith, they might find a lot of things of use in here. It's a very particular flavor of Christianity and faith that he goes for in this, and yeah, I was kind of bored. It wasn't really what I'd signed up for. I'm sure other people might enjoy it. I didn't so much. I gave it 2 stars. The next book I read, which was fulfilling the prompt of a fiction or non-fiction book about a serial killer, was The Vanishing Triangle by Claire McGowan. The Vanishing Triangle that's actually referred to in the title is about an area around Dublin in the east of Ireland where there was a series of disappearances over the course of many years of young women in fairly similar circumstances and whose bodies have never been recovered. It goes a little bit beyond that. It discusses the case of a man called Larry Murphy who abducted and assaulted a woman, but was actually caught in the act and was sentenced for that particular crime, but there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute him for any of the other disappearances, even though he is still considered one of the prime suspects. There are other suspects as well, which is explored in Claire McGowan's book. Problem is, kind of everything else is explored in it as well. It's almost a bit of a snapshot of time and place in Ireland, where a lot of things are brought up that have anything tangentially to do with violence towards women, and it covers everything from some of the scandals in the church to the Oma bombings and things like that. So it comes across as quite unfocused and scattershot. I enjoyed it because I'm from there and I grew up around that time and I'm of a similar age to the author, so this felt very, very close to me. And not just that, but I'm actually from somewhere very, very close to where that suspect Larry Murphy is from, so it appealed to me because of all of that. And while Claire McGowan does talk about things that are worth talking about, attitudes towards women, violence against women, culture of covering things up and silence around it. These are all worthwhile things to talk about, but in a book that's supposed to be about the Vanishing Triangle, it comes across as very unfocused and throwing in the kitchen sink. I gave it 2 stars and I can't really say that I recommend it. Now, to fulfill the prompt of a book with orange in the title or orange on the cover, I kind of cheated a little bit and went for There by Tommy Orange. In my defense, there are covers of this that are orange, and I thought when I ordered it that this was orange as well, but it is actually more red than orange. So There is Tommy Orange's debut novel, and it tells the story of, from multiple perspectives, of all of these various people with Native American heritage who aren't what are typically portrayed as in sort of, people growing up in reservations and things like that. Now, these are people who are predominantly living in Oakland in California, but other places around the country as well. And it's very much the Native American experience from the perspective of urban people, as opposed to out living in reservations and directly connected with their heritage. It gives the perspective of multiple characters in the run-up to a powwow in Oakland, which is kind of like a cultural gathering with competitions and music and singing and dancing and all of that sort of thing from Native American culture. And it's the perspective of all these characters leading up to that particular powwow that is happening. This is really f***ing good. This was genuinely an absolute joy to read. Every single one of the characters felt real and fleshed out, despite the fact that they only had a couple of chapters each, if that. But you got a full story of them. You get a real sense of their experiences as Americans and Native Americans, and the challenges that they faced, from all sorts of things like poverty, alcoholism, violence, all of those sorts of things that they were facing. And it is told exceptionally well, beautifully written, wonderful characters. Highly recommend it. It's my book of the month, and it's something drastic is going to have to change for it not to be my book of the year at the end of 2024. Now, because They're There only tangentially met the requirements of being orange, and because it wasn't really a spooky book in any shape, manner or form, I kind of went for a bit of a bonus book on top of this. And because I'd picked a book from a Native American author about Native Americans, I went for another book that was a horror book by a Native American author about Native Americans, and that was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. That connection between the two of those books made an awful lot more sense in my head. Now, I really don't want to spoil the story of this, because I do firmly believe it's best going into this as blind as you possibly can. But basically, it's the story of 4 Native American men who took part in this illegal hunting activity, and some time later, they are facing the consequences of their actions on that day, when something supernatural is forcing them to face those consequences. I don't want to go into it any further than that, because it is one of the most interesting and original horrors that I've read in quite some time. And the Native American perspective on this, actually coming off the back of They're There, even though the books couldn't be any more different, coming off the back of the Native American perspective in They're There, in being a bit gritty and real, into something that was a bit more fantastical, I really appreciated it an awful lot more. So couldn't be more different, but I thoroughly enjoyed The Only Good Indians, and I gave that one 4 stars. And to round off the spooky, scary skeleton Halloween readathon prompts with a book about a witch, I read Carpe Jugulum by Terry Pratchett, the last in his series about the witches of Discworld. I am reading the entire Discworld series, so in addition to that, I did also finish off The Last Continent from September, and I read The Fifth Elephant as well. As per usual with all the Discworld books I read, each one of those will get its own review video. My Discworld reviews go up pretty much every single Monday. If you'd like to see those, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. In addition to the Halloween readathon, I also read some books for some book clubs as well. The first one is I'm with the Banned Books book club, arranged by MJ over at Reading This Life. And again, this is to draw attention to books that have been banned in schools in the US, because they seem to do that an awful lot. The first one of those was my review of A Court of Thorns and Roses, which, that was an experience. I don't think it was particular for me, but this month, this was something I was much more interested in, and that was Oryx and Crake by Margaret Atwood. This is the first part of her Mad Adam trilogy, and this, it tells a story of Snowman, as he is in the present, or Jimmy as he was in the past. Snowman lives in a post-apocalyptic world where he is one of the last survivors of the human race, but there are other versions of people there, people known as the Children of Crake, who are this quite innocent but well adapted group of people who look to Snowman for, I suppose, guidance and leadership. We also see the story in the past of Jimmy as he's growing up, in a world where genetic modification is having a huge impact on the lives of people, and there's a real sense of haves and have-nots in this world, and it is about the people he remembers in that time, most notably his love interest Oryx and his childhood friend, who seems to be the architect of these new people, Crake. Oryx and Crake is a pretty fantastic book. The story is extremely well crafted. The world in which we see Jimmy and Snowman, one and the same person, just at different points in their lives, both are, potential futures of our world, and both are very well realized and scarily plausible as well. It's not an easy read at parts, and I think the reason it's probably banned in schools is that there are some chapters which have some extended themes of exploitation of children, specifically in some unnamed third world countries where, as it's put, life is cheap. And I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. You can probably use your imagination. It doesn't glorify it in any way to sort of say that this is a titillating thing that is going to appeal to the reader. It is very much presented as something awful. It doesn't make the read necessarily any easier. So, I am opposed to banning of books in school, but I would say that this is something that probably isn't suitable for a younger readership. But that being said, it is, as a piece of speculative fiction, it is pretty fantastic. I fully intend to read the other two books in the series, even though I don't think they're kind of direct sequels. I think it's different perspectives on the end of the world and the post-apocalypse and all of that sort of stuff. But even still, the way that Oryx and Crake was presented, this was my first Margaret Atwood book, but I am absolutely going to be reading some more of her stuff. And for me, this was easily a 4.5-star read. Highly recommended, but go in knowing what to expect. The next book club I was involved in is the Fright Club book club that is arranged by Cliff at Cliff's Dark Gems and Crits at C Crits Read. And their first book was Clowns vs. Spiders by Jeff Strand. This book is exactly as daft as it sounds like it is, and it is a horror book about clowns versus spiders. I have to say that the premise and the setup for this book was excellent. The way the spiders were introduced to the story was nice and creepy and gory and a little bit plausible, which I liked an awful lot. And the way that the clowns are presented is really, really well done as well. This is a group of clowns who have approached clowning as a vocation. This group love being clowns, and they love bringing joy and happiness and laughter to children and to people, and they find themselves in a world where clowns are no longer considered funny, they're considered scary, and it really hurts them that they are not considered to be the joyous entertainers that they want to be anymore. And it's really lovely the way that these clown characters are set up. I think it starts to fall apart a little bit when the clowns versus spiders actually happens. And the reason that is the case is there's lots of extended dialogue scenes between the clowns sort of bantering off each other, and this happens amidst their battles with the spiders, and they're quite long, and because they are taking the time out to have these long banter-filled chats, it kind of reduces the sense of jeopardy from the spiders. And the dialogue isn't laugh out loud funny, it's kind of witty and enjoyable. And what we end up with is a book that's not quite scary enough to be a horror with comedy elements, and not quite funny enough to be a comedy with horror elements. I wanted to like it an awful lot more than I did. It is a lot of fun, but yeah, it does, unfortunately for me, tend to go downhill after the clowns and the spiders actually begin to clash. I know Cliff's going to really disagree with me on this one because he absolutely loved this book. I only actually gave it 2.5 stars, but weirdly, I'd probably recommend it. It is enjoyable. It's an indie horror book. I quite liked it, but it just... yeah, it kind of dropped off a cliff for me after the clowns and the spiders got introduced to each other. Sorry. So after reading The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Carmilla for the Halloween readathon, I was inspired to do my top 10 classic horrors. And I did a video for that. I'll put the link for that on screen. But as part of that video, and while I was prepping for the video, I actually reread a couple of shorter horrors that I hadn't read in a very long time. First one was The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft, which is a Lovecraftian cosmic horror about a man who goes to this small town in New England and discovers that the locals may be involved in this strange cult relating to some sort of cosmic being, but also the actual people in the village are being physically changed and all sorts of creepy weirdness is going on, which is great fun. And I also reread lot number 249 by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he of Sherlock Holmes fame. And this is one of the earliest stories about a reanimated mummy. It's a book that I am absolutely trying to get more people to read because I really feel it's a bit of an overlooked classic. Shadow over Innsmouth I gave 4 stars to, and I'm happy to say that lot number 249 did not disappoint me after all this time, and it still was a 4.5 star read for me. Absolutely check that one out if you've never ever read it before. Because Carmilla predated Dracula, it also sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole in sort of looking at some of the earliest pieces of written literature about vampires, Carmilla being one of the first. But the very first one was a short story called The Vampyre by John William Polidori, which I read. It's not very long, it's not very vampire-y, it's not very scary, it's not very good. It's an interesting curiosity if you want to look at early vampire stories. Basically, it's the story of this enigmatic guy who joins society and seems to just take pleasure in the misery of other people. Yeah, it's short enough so that it's not going to waste too much of your time, but you know, it's an interesting curiosity in the early vampire literature and not much else. I gave that one 2.5 stars. Also, while I was going down the rabbit hole of short stories that inspired things, I read 8 o'clock in the morning by Ray Faraday Nelson, which is a really, really short story, but it is the basis for the film They Live by John Carpenter, which is a great film. This short story is great fun. It's only a couple of pages long, but what it does in those couple of pages is pretty damn good. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out. You'll read it in less than 20 minutes, and I would give it a 4 star. And the final thing I read in October, well, actually, it was probably the first thing I read in October because this is a holdover from one I finished up in September, and that was Authority by Jeff Vandermeer, which is the second part in his Southern Reach trilogy, which was started by Annihilation. So this is the story of the new head of the Southern Reach base that's by Area X, a man known as Control, who is coming in to unpick what has happened in the previous expedition where we saw the psychologist and the biologist and what happened to them. Some of those people have returned, or perhaps not. And this is about him trying to unpick not just what's going on in Area X itself, but also in the Southern Reach Agency. It has a whole lot of sort of paranoia and people working against each other and alliances and all of that sort of stuff. I think a lot of people really quite dislike this after having read Annihilation, but I actually thought it was pretty good. It's not as strong as Annihilation, but few books are. But, you know, it was still a solid 4-star read for me, and I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to reading the third part, Acceptance, and I believe there's a fourth part coming out later this year as well. So that was everything that I read in October. I hope you enjoyed that. If you read any of those books, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on them. The next thing I will do is I'll give you an update as to what I'm planning on reading in November. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that, and take care.